No, I thought I saw on social media you still catching bodies. Wasn't there? Well, talk to me about that route. You ran this deep route back to the back of the end zone. It looks like your quarterback dropped a dime there.
He did.
So first of all, sounds like you still got some wheels. But what was the move? What was the route? What'd you do there?
So that route was what we call a corner go, and I hadn't really seen anyone do that. I was messing around in another league a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And just kind of watching what defenses do. And I was like, they all jump that corner if we hit it a couple times. So let's just take 3 corner steps and then whip it back up. And there ought to be nobody there. And so that quarterback that you saw in that video and I have worked on it a couple of times. And yeah, it's a nice little route, especially in that indoor space where everything's a little constricted. You just, when you come out, you bend it back in a little bit at the top so that you're not running full steam into the plexiglass. And it was a perfect pass. So I forgot that was out there. Yeah. That's funny.
Did that hang up in the air for a while? There's a lot to think about while you wait.
Is there anything better than a trip getting ready? Nope. For a long journey where our podcast released a new epi, searching for a fade phenom, new fixation. Giving this a subscribe is the same sensation. Started with the day ones, they gave us fuel to support the season. Could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here for a reason. Notification bells, text some friends, all to let you know. Check your Bluetooth, connect, talk your wisdom out.
Welcome in, everyone. Episode 85. Ocho cinco. Ochenta. I don't want to keep going. I probably messed that up. But this episode is called Phineas the Thought with our guest, Phineas Clark. Phineas, I wanted to go so many different ways with that pun title, but Phineas the Thought. Has anyone ever used that on you before?
Actually, no. This is my first time ever hearing that one. So congrats.
All right. That's I'm not going to ask you if it's good. I'm too sensitive, but I just wanted to know if it was authentic. That's all I care about.
It's an original. You own that one.
I want to jump in, man. There's so many ways I want to go with this, but let's start with, bro, you're episode 85 and that number means something to you. Why is that?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of reasons, man. It was always my playing number from an early age. Like it was the first time I'd stopped emulating other people, like on the fields, and it just honestly came to me in an odd setting, but it just sort of hit me that it was for me. And I didn't grow up in a super religious or structured theological home. I was exposed to different religions and everything, and I am a spiritual person. But as far as my journey through growing up, the thing that was really my ritual was sports. And so the sort of identifier or the thing that set me apart was that number, to the point where now friends of mine, we're getting up there in years, and someone will send me a picture like, oh, I was at gate 85 in the airport and I thought of you, or, this is people I've known since high school or college. So it's just always kind of been my jam. And I've gotten into numerology, and some of the things it represents there seemed to fit me pretty well.
Wait, what you mean getting old? I thought I saw on social media you still catching bodies. Wasn't there? Well, talk to me about that route. You ran this deep route back to the back of the end zone. It looks like your quarterback dropped a dime there.
He did.
So, first of all, sounds like you still got some wheels. But what was the move? What was the route? What'd you do there?
So that route was what we call a corner go, and I hadn't really seen anyone do that. I was messing around in another league a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And just kind of watching what defenses do. And I was like, they all jump that corner if we hit it a couple times. So let's just take 3 corner steps and then whip it back up. And there ought to be nobody there. And so that quarterback that you saw in that video and I have worked on it a couple of times. And yeah, it's a nice little route, especially in that indoor space where everything's a little constricted. You just, when you come out, you bend it back in a little bit at the top so that you're not running full steam into the plexiglass. And it was a perfect pass. So I forgot that was out there. Yeah. That's funny.
Did that hang up in the air for a while? There's a lot to think about while you're waiting for it, because you
can see me chopping my feet a little bit. I'm thinking I'm less worried about the defender and more about where the plexiglass is. So you can see me kind of chopping my feet. And if you look, like, I mean, I end up like on the white line at the end.
Yeah.
So it was a perfect pass, and he gave me just enough grace where I didn't have to, try and lay out or anything. So it was perfect.
Toe tap. You only needed 1 foot though, right?
In that league, it's 2.
Oh, okay. I thought you was overachieving. Yeah. I thought you were overachieving. I was about to come for you. I was like, bro, you only needed 1 foot. You put 2 down.
Hey, no, you never know. They might need an old guy in the league one day. I got to stay ready. So
a 10-day contract. Wait, that might be NBA, but we'll call it 10-day.
The NFL ever goes that way, we're staying ready. Damn it!
You got to. If a dude by the name of Puka Nacua could get some love, Joe Flacco came off the couch and he played himself onto a roster next year. So
he actually looks like a better athlete now than he did for a lot of the time in Baltimore. It's pretty wild.
He's got talent though. He got Amari. Yeah. Njoku's amazing. What's his name? Kareem Hunt came back to them. He never was a slouch. He just was like, bruh, y'all keep giving it to Nick Chubb. So if you're going to do that, I'm out. and he walked. But he looked good. So you couldn't slack off. The receiving core was all right. I mean, they're legit. They won 11 games. Miles Garrett on the other side.
It's weird because they're a team that I've perennially thought of a certain way, right? Because for most of our lives, they haven't been that competitive.
Yes.
And they have had a couple of good seasons in there, like sneaky good ones, but it's been hard for them to shake that, right?
Yeah.
And so I really have had to unlearn the way I think about a lot of things in life. You have to unlearn the way you think about them as they change and grow. And oddly, the Cleveland Browns are one of those things where you have to really respect who they are now instead of thinking about who they've been for the past, 20, 30 years.
I'm very curious. But you know what? Let's get into a little bit of other stuff. Who's your team? What's your NFL team?
The New England Patriots. Grew up in New England. I know everyone's enjoying the sort of undoing of the dynasty right now, but I can't be anything but grateful. It was a team that wasn't very competitive when I was a little kid.
Yeah.
Started to become relevant, and then lightning in a bottle with Brady and Belichick, and then 20 years of just expecting to be in the Super Bowl every year, which you can start to take for granted. But because I have those memories of the team being pretty bad when I was a little kid, I have tried to savor it. And now that it appears to be over, at least for now, I'm just trying to exist in gratitude, and just smile because it happened and not cry because it's over, that kind of thing. So
and you'll always, no one takes trophies from you. So just like in the NBA, you got the Lakers and Boston. I think they both have like 17 or something, and they're very happy. Actually, you probably know that, but they're very happy to be like, hey, we got these 17. They might not have won one. Boston hasn't got one since 07, 08 season. 08.
Yep.
Okay, I was there for that parade, by the way.
You were.
It's the only NBA parade I've ever been to. And I also.
Why would you go to another one? I mean, that's the one to go to.
Well, I can't agree with you, but I will never say on these airways what my favorite team is. I want to keep it. I want to keep it neutral. I'm Switzerland, but I had a blast. I walked to it. We gonna get to that. We want to get to that. All right. So you said you're from New England. Like where specifically though? Like you a Southie? I don't hear the accent.
No, I started to develop it when I was a little younger, and neither of my parents are from New England. So when I would come home dropping my R's, I would kind of get in that, during the school year I was with my mother. So I'd come home, and if I was like, Ma, we got to get in the car, we're going to be late, she would say, hold on, there are 26 letters in this alphabet. You will pronounce every single one of them. So I didn't really have the freedom to adopt a strong regional dialect. And then, living in the Boston area when I was really little, and then, so Jamaica Plain.
Okay.
And then as I got older, up to New Hampshire. So I went to high school in New Hampshire. And then my father was living in Minnesota. So I would do like an 85-15 split during the year where I'd be with him for the large chunk of the summer.
Y'all see what he
And
did
that's
there?
where I
85-15, 85-15. This dude, he's locked in.
I mean, the math supports it. The math supports it. But yeah, so my father was out in the Midwest in Minnesota. So I'd be out there during the summers and then back in New England for the school year. So I had sort of a sense of otherness in each place where it was like, oh, there's the kid that disappears in the summer, or like, oh, there's the kid that just appears for the summer.
Yeah.
So I had my little crews in each area, but I always had a slight sense of being a citizen of many places, or a citizen of the world, even though I hadn't really been around the globe at that point.
I was the country cousin from down south that used to go to New York. My parents are from New York. I'm curious though. All right, so hold on now. If Pops is from Minnesota, I want to say I've had like 3 people from Minnesota on the podcast. Two previous. I'm gonna have to go back and check that. I think I've had 2 previous. But hey, what's your dad talk like? I know he got that. Don't you know? Does he got the Minnesota accent?
Not really. So he's actually from Utah. Minnesota was where he wound up when he really got into his professional career.
Okay.
So I think he was probably in his mid-20s by the time he got there. So he's got more of a Marlboro man, mountain man kind of thing going on. He grew up skiing, and like the biathlon is like a shooting event on skis. So he used to hunt on skis. Like there are these birds called grouse that nest in the snow, and he used to ski, and they would pop up in the air, and then he'd, do them in. So, yeah. So he had a very different upbringing than I did, but he's got some amazing stories, and he was a great teacher for me for just things that you don't necessarily know when you're going to need them, but you need them. So whether it's how to make things with your hands, how to change a spark plug, how to, how to whittle, anything like that, campfires, that kind of stuff. He had such an education in that because of where he grew up and how he grew up, that I was sort of inundated with it to the point where I thought this is something I was going to need to do every week, no matter where I was. And, I don't use many of those skills that often, but they are nice to have.
Yeah. Is he a Jazz fan?
He is not a huge basketball fan.
Okay.
I think if you made him pick a team, he would probably now pick the Timberwolves, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
From his time in Minnesota. Okay, I'll give him that. Maybe. Okay, so you guys could bond over KG then.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't dislike any of the Minnesota teams. Like I have a lot of friends because, I went to the University of Minnesota. So I have a lot of friends that are lifelong diehard Minnesota sports fans. I, in the summers, was going to Twins games and, root for those teams. They're just not they're not the ones in my heart, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. No, I get that. All right. So growing up, Jamaica Plain, how often were you in downtown Boston growing up? I'm just so curious.
Not a ton. I mean, it would be one of those things. There would be memorable occasions, right? You'd go somewhere for the weekend, or you'd go to see a game, or you'd go to the aquarium, or you had a lot of school field trips to things like that. So it's not like I was there every single day or, walking the streets by myself as a toddler or anything, but I was out there often enough where it felt familiar. And it's interesting because when you're somewhere as a young guy and then you grow up and come back to it with fresh eyes, things seem smaller, but you also start to realize how interconnected they are, or the significance of things that you didn't really pick up on. So Boston was just sort of the default setting for a city for me. For a long time. That and then Duluth, Minnesota, where my dad was, which is much smaller. And so now coming back to it as an adult, or even in my college years, appreciating what makes it special, appreciating what makes it unique and how it has its own culture, its own dialect, its own food, the European architecture and the just how ancient it is. I think a lot of that was lost on me as a kid because it was just the backdrop for me being a kid, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. I'm so curious here. growing up, that means you were a Celts fan the entire time they had you as a Celts fan, I'm going to say. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to that. We're coming back to that. So growing up in Mass, for the listeners, the people who've never been there, I'm going to go ahead and drop some stereotypes. I like stereotypes, Phineas, because when they're funny, some are true. We got to know. Sometimes you got to laugh. Some stereotypes are true. So how about this? How many times over the summer did you and your fam end up in Martha's Vineyard or something at an all-white party where the Obamas showed up? I mean, not the Obamas, but you get what I'm saying. We feel like everyone else outside, we think that all y'all go to Martha's Vineyard. Like you got a cottage up there. How true is that?
That is 100% not my story.
Okay.
I've been to Martha's Vineyard 0 times in my life. I have still not made it out there. Now that I'm back in this area, it is sort of a bucket list item. I know there's like a weekend when, especially a lot of Black folks, like there's a Black section of Martha's Vineyard where people head out to. Some of our friends have invited us to that. So that is on sort of the bucket list. But to this day, I have not been there. And talking about that sense of otherness, I didn't feel necessarily like you're dyed-in-the-wool New Englander in terms of I didn't grow up with family all over the region and I wasn't out on the Cape all the time. And it was the place where I grew up. It was the place where I learned how to do a bunch of things, went to school, fell in love with sports and theater. It's not necessarily a place that I explored every inch of, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So Phineas, bro, I'm glad you cleared your schedule. We talked off air about that. I want everybody else to know that. I'm not letting them think that this is going to be some 4-hour episode. But Phineas, I had to get you on. I've asked you a long time ago. You're just so busy, bruh. But bruh, there's so many things. There's so many lanes. Okay, so first of all, the name is Phineas. We're gonna need to know that. Second of all, bruh, you're like a sports dude, so you're a jock. There's that. But bruh, you also were in theater. And since you're all the way over there and I'm in Texas, at least you ain't gonna punch me in the face when I say this, bro. You're supposed to be a theater nerd. So I don't know who you are, man. Like you can't. I'm jealous that you could be in all these different lanes. So let's start with the first one. Where does the name Phineas come from?
Phineas was the name of a character in a book that my mother read when she was in high school and really just sort of fell in love with the character and found him to be dynamic and inspiring. And the way she tells it, she said, if I ever have a son, I'm going to name him this. And this is apparently an epiphany she had in high school. So years later, of course, I come along and I guess it was predetermined that was going to be my name. Yeah. And so it's funny because I knew that I was named for this book and it's sort of young adult fiction or like maybe adult fiction in terms of the content it discusses. It deals a lot with, sort of mental health and depression during the war years of World War II. But she had told me how great this character was, this protagonist. And so eventually I get to read the book. I think I was 13 years old. And I'm reading it. And if you haven't read A Separate Piece by John Knowles, take off your headphones right now. Spoiler alert. Phineas, who is, for argument's sake, the protagonist, definitely dies as a 17-year-old in the book. So I'm reading it and I'm like, Mom, what the, you name me after a guy that doesn't even make it out of high school? Like, what the hell? So I was a little concerned. And then the way he dies, it's kind of complicated, but suffice it to say, it modified my behavior for the next few years. I was like, my 18th birthday, I am cool on this, that, and the other thing. So yeah, but it's a name that, has a lot of meaning to her and was pretty singular and unique in the modern era until about 2008. And then Disney comes out with a cartoon called Phineas and Ferb that I now hear incessant jokes and wordplay about. So there we are.
Yeah. I was not going to use that. I just want you to know there was no way I was going to do that. That's the easy way. I don't want to take the easy stuff that's out there. Okay, so it's senior year high school. Let's say you're brown bagging it Because it sounds like Mountain Man Dad would be like, boy, take some jerky with you and you'll be all right. Let's say you got your tray, slop. Lunch lady in the hairnet throws some chili. You may be in the bathroom for the remainder of the periods, but you get that tray, you walk out. What table you sitting at, bro?
Senior year, I was not at a table. My crew and I usually found a different section of hallway to perch on or squat in every year. So, and to paint the picture, I went to a high school that the student body was somewhere between 1,000 and 1,100 kids. So not massive, but it had grown to that point. So our cafeteria, I think a few years after I graduated, it gets overhauled and renovated and is now much larger. But at the time, it was not big enough to support the entire student body. And the entire school got lunch at the same time. So you were literally going to be fighting for real estate in there. And there were a couple of crews that had the same table every day, probably all 4 years, right?
Yeah.
In our case, there were 5 of us that were really tight friends, and you'd have like a significant other come on for a time or a new friend or something like that. So between 5 to 7 of us at a given time. And by sophomore year, this clique had really congealed.
Yeah.
And so by that time, I think out of necessity, we found like a place that was close to our homerooms or our classes and sat. And then the next year, for whatever reason, it was a different spot on the second floor. And then I think senior year, it was yet another spot on the second floor. But this spot on the second floor had like a lot of natural light because it was by these bay windows. So I can see the 3 spots that I really remember spending my lunches at year by year by year, but I don't really know who picked them or why. I just, and they weren't spots you would necessarily point out and be like, oh yeah, you know, the spot between rooms 7 and 20 or whatever, you know, it was just a spot on the floor.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm always kind of curious because I like to see where people start, who they become, and sometimes we can read into those type of things. So always curious about that. All right. So then you played sports. What sports did you play? And don't short us. This is a podcast. They can pause it. You can't go too long. I want them beats, man. What sports did you play?
So all growing up, I played baseball. That was my first love.
What position?
And shortstop and center field, depending on the year. Normally what would happen is I would be new to a team and there would be an established shortstop. And then they would say, well, you can run, let's put you in center field. Right. And then at some point, either the next year or mid-season, something would happen or I would get a shot and then I would usually get to stick. In high school, I switched back and forth between infield and outfields, depending on the year. But I mostly played either short or center. And in some cases, when I was younger, I played right field as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was going to say you must have been pre-athletic for the short, and then you got to have some wheels to be that center. What that cannon look like from center field? You had some putouts you want to tell us about?
Yeah, I had a couple of shots, man. I that's kind of one of the things that differentiated me. And as a guy that hadn't really grown until later in high school, I was a late bloomer, I would say, physically. The one thing I always had a good swing and I could always throw the ball as hard or harder than everybody else, depending on the team or the year. I just had that since I was a kid. And so it was one of those things that, you develop it, but my approach to developing it was really just playing a lot and throwing all the time in the summer. I see now on Instagram or whatever, they have all these bespoke workouts for pitchers versus infielders and all this gear. And I'm sure all of that is really helpful. And part of me thinks, man, it would have been awesome to have all these things. Maybe I would have thrown 100 miles an hour. And at the same time, I do defend the point where I was a well-rounded athlete. I played 2 to 3 sports every year. I developed my abilities by playing. And I think that there's something to be said for that. But I know that everything has become very specialized in sports. And I think that's a good thing. I worry that it could take the joy out of it for people that get on that track really young, if that makes any sense.
No, I agree. I think, especially at the younger ages, I think it's got to be diverse. Not to mention, I also look at some of the best athletes. John Elway, baseball player. Patrick Mahomes, baseball player. Deion Sanders was a heck of a basketball player and track guy. And then we know that he went on to play 2 professional sports. Bo Jackson. I mean, those are just some
Jackie
of the ones.
Robinson.
Yes. Charlie Ward. He won the Heisman and then still played for the Knicks in the NBA for a good amount of years. I met him in real life. It was so awesome.
You met Charlie Ward?
Yes, I did. Got the picture.
What was that like?
Amazing. Like he took the time to talk. it was in Tallahassee at a game, and he didn't care. Matter of fact, it was the Florida game, Florida State. So it was a rivalry game, which is kind of why he was on campus. Hey, I asked for the picture. I was with a college buddy. He said, no problem. And then we talked a little bit. I was like, yeah, man. Hey, that Knicks team, man, y'all were gritty. And I said, I remember you dunking a lot as a joke. And he took the joke and went with it. Like, he was just an amazing guy. It was a great conversation. I hate to say this wrong, but he's a religious guy. And so you could tell, like, part of his mantra in life is to be a good person. And that came through. I felt good energy. Didn't feel like I was in his way. Didn't feel like he was trying to rush it. In fact, he was standing there. So after we left, other people came up. He took pictures. Amazing guy. Still in good shape. Still looks thin and in shape. He's coaching now. Matter of fact, he coaches high school basketball, and not football, but he's a basketball coach now. So
that's dope.
It was amazing, man. It was so cool. So, all right. So baseball was one sport. You said 2 or 3. What are some other sports that you did?
Football starting in high school. I had, as I mentioned, wasn't the largest kid growing up. I struggled to gain weight. I had a later growth spurt. So I was always quick. And the middle school I went to had one sport that had soccer, and it was mandatory that you play. So the entire class was on the team. So it was like 5th and 6th had a team, and then 7th and 8th had a team, and you played in like a town league, but it was the school team. It was a pretty alternative school, very arts forward, which helps explain some of the other things about me. But soccer, I think, helped me in the long run, even though I was kind of punching the air because I wasn't playing Pop Warner football, and my mother was worried I was going to get my head knocked in, which might have happened. Again, I was probably, 75, 80 pounds in 7th grade, going into 7th grade. I wasn't a very big dude. So soccer, I think, helped a lot with agility, understanding space, and conditioning. Yeah. And then I get to high school, and no one can stop me based on my weight. I had also grown a bit, and I go out for football and fell in love with that as well. So then played football, and then winter sports wise, I ran winter track.
What events?
We had winter. What's that now?
What events in track?
We had the 55. It was a really short sprint. And that was made for me because I really do not like running at top speed for excessive periods of time. I like races where you hear the gun and you do your best and it is over before you realize what has happened. So 100 is about the best you get in outdoor. I don't know if they still do the 60, but the 55 was for a football player, for a receiver. It's like, it's perfect. It just trains you on about the most running you're going to do. And I trained on some of the others, relays, did fairly well with those. Anything over 200, I was really, really over. I was completely fine to let other people have that. Obviously had to do them for conditioning, and I hated them so much during the conditioning and during practice that the longer races, if I could have been good at them, I will never know, because I really did not have any interest in running that much or that hard for that long.
Yeah. No, I understand that. I just felt like you coming from that soccer background, I thought you had the conditioning. So your skill to the soccer team was your speed, the bursts. Is that is that what you gave the soccer team?
I think a couple things. One, I'm left-footed, so you typically have a job if you're left-footed.
Yes, you do.
And I really was very goal-minded, probably to the detriment of the team at some points, but I was very attack-minded. As I continued to play, I became more of a complete player in terms of somebody that prioritized defense and understood, the shape of an offensive attack plan. I think early on, what got me on the pitch was being fast and being left-footed and being aggressive.
Okay.
Because again, I wasn't huge and I wasn't the most technically skilled in terms of, could I dribble through the entire defense? No. Could I get around one guy and take off? Yes. And then as I worked on things like crossing and corner kicks, I became a little more valuable and probably a better asset to the team.
Huh.
But as far as the conditioning, it wasn't so much the lack of conditioning. I think track and even outdoor running at this point, mentally, it is such a load for me compared to chasing a ball or competing with another person or a group of people that are in front of you. And I am somebody, for better or worse, that really benefits from having a competitive setting in which to exercise or in which to push yourself. So I'm sure physically I could sustain running a 200, a 300, a 400. It was just pushing yourself past that level of discomfort, pushing yourself to that next level. The want to for that simply, especially in training, simply was not there. The way it was in the shorter sprints, the way it was in all of the, what I would call team sports. I know you have a track team, but you're out there often as an individual competitor, right?
Yep.
And that's never really the case in football, baseball, lacrosse I wound up playing. Those are things where, yes, you have moments where you're highlighted, baseball, batting, whatnot, but there is always an element of mano a mano or measuring yourself against an immediate challenge. And I think for whatever reason, that immediacy, that urgency is something that always kept the fire really roaring for me. Whereas something like, all right, we're going to run 8 400s today as a conditioning finisher or whatever the case may be, that really just did not do it for me. And I'm sure if I saw a hypnotist or a sports psychologist at some point as a young man, maybe I would have really found a love for those longer races. But it just, even now running for distance, I will do it for the benefit of my health. I don't enjoy it. It's not something I look forward to. It is something I consider a necessary part of maintaining my health.
Yeah. No, I could see that. All right. So we got through those, but I got to know, any regional, any state honors, any district championships you won in any of the three? You came from behind in a relay. I'm so curious.
I had a couple of wins in the 55. I was never really on any big time lists. I think I got some honorable mentions in track. Baseball wise, same thing. Honorable mention, all region, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I don't think I really had any monstrous statistical seasons. And we weren't a school that was dominant in sports. We were a school that had a couple of standout athletes. Our running back, our halfback for the football team, I think made either first or second team All-State. But there were 2 years in particular where he really was the crux of our offense, and passing was sort of a change up. It wasn't until I think junior year where we switched to the I form offense where we opened it up a little bit, and the offense really became still predicated on the run, but you had more play action. You had dropbacks and rollouts and a full passing tree that was actually utilized. And you're still not talking about the way high school offenses look today, which I salivate over and really, really would love to have had access to. But at the same time, with the challenge in front of me, I did the most that I could. And, if I caught 3 balls a game in that offense, that was a big day. So I wasn't really ever highlighted, and I wouldn't say I was the primary weapon on any of those teams. I was becoming a better player, mastering my craft, and helping us win a couple of games that
Welcome in, everyone. Episode 80.
Needed an extra push, but we had an absolute monster at tailback. He often just brought home the bacon, not quite by himself, but almost.
Yeah. Theater. You just wowed us with the jock talk, multiple sports, but also theater. So when did you have the time, and why did you stick with it? I know you looked around the room and you were like, man, you ain't like monster tailback boy. You ain't on the relay team. Because you also got to fit in with them, which is a testament to you. So talk us through. It sounds like it started in middle school.
It started pretty young. I mean, there were school plays in elementary school. My mother really has an artistic soul and has found ways to express that since she's been in her professional career. She's a talented photographer. She's a visual artist. She's done sculpture. She does fabric modification. She does all kinds of cool stuff. So she's always had a strong muse. And I think in her childhood didn't have opportunities to express that. So one of the things that was important to her raising her first son was making sure I had access and exposure to the kinds of things that were denied her or that just weren't available to her. And so bringing me to auditions, taking tap classes with me when I was younger, that was something we did together. I took performing for granted, not really being observant and realizing that not every kid in this school is doing this. Not every kid that I know is doing this. I kind of thought, oh yeah, every kid does a little bit of theater and then goes and plays baseball and then learns how to build model rockets with their dad. I thought that was a very normal existence. And I guess my head was so far into what I was immersed in that I didn't really look around and think, oh, this kid really specializes in this thing, or this kid hasn't ever been to an audition and maybe they want to, but they're scared or their parents don't support them. So to the extent that you can take something for granted early on, I really kind of did. And getting to high school, the friends I made that were based on outlook, proximity, sense of humor, not proximity, sorry, outlook, sort of sense of humor and overall personality, like the people I really vibed with, none of us had all of the same interests. One guy was on the golf team. One guy was a prodigious violinist. One of our friends, Heather, had like 4 jobs all through high school. So that was kind of her jam. Yeah. I mean, she was just a workaholic at that young age, but she was, very self-sufficient. And so we weren't united by the things we did adjacent to school. We were united by our personalities and by the way we thought about the world, the observations we made, the things we thought were funny. And the one area where most of us came together was on the school improv team. So that was a very unifying experience for all of us, where we had this outlet together. We could create together. We could explore together. And on top of that, it was very foundational for my approach as an actor going forward. I didn't really realize that it was going to be so informative of my process, but it has become that for me. I believe in the power of improvisation, even within a straight play or something that's filmic. I really find that the ability and the willingness to play, explore, to fail big, and to come back at it with zeal is really, really important. And that's the thing that we all did together. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. That reminds me, there was a movie I meant to send you. I was going to send you the trailer. I have not. It's called Brother's Son. It's on Netflix. You got to check that out. There's a nod to improv in there. And you're also the only person I know that even dabbled. I wish I would have done some improv. I had an opportunity in LA. Oh, you'll appreciate this. Every audition I went to in LA, I got the gig. Yeah.
Wait,
yeah.
You're batting 1,000 on auditions?
Yes, I did. Did a movie, a bunch of commercials. Went to a commercial that turned into a gentleman saying, "Hey, we have an improv opportunity. You should come out." Didn't take him up on it. One of my regrets. I feel like that would have been my jam, and I regret that. But brother, son, check it out when you get some time. You sound pretty busy, so you're never gonna have any time. Yeah. So I was batting 1,000. I had every opportunity, and it was pretty good for me. But you sounded like you were pretty intrigued by that.
Well, because rejection is such a huge part of an actor's life, and it is something that I have had to deal with. And there are hot streaks, don't get me wrong. There are times where it feels like you're booking absolutely everything. But over the course of an entire year, I have never found that to be sustainable. Now, there are people out there that don't even have to audition anymore. And I've been in grooves like that in certain communities, whether it's theater or, commercial directors that just like me. But on the whole, I don't think I was batting 1,000 after a month of going out there and putting myself out there. So that is an achievement. That's pretty incredible.
I can't say I went to one every month, but the things I went to, I was just floored. And at a point, I guess I was just so happy to be doing it. I didn't realize it. And then after that, I went to an audition for a game show, and we did the pilot. So we did about 4 or 5 episodes. That's on YouTube out there. And yeah, they took me right away. I even showed up late to the audition. That's a longer story. Let's just say, let's say my car was jacked while I was on the way to the audition, but he didn't move the car. He jumped in the car while I was getting gas. I'm on the other side pumping, and all of a sudden I see the car go like that. My windows are tinted. It's Georgia, and it's flat tinted. So I'm like, wait. And then I go around, open the door. There's a dude in the back seat. I'm like, what the? So I reach in and grab the guy, pull him out, and drop him. That was adrenaline, but it wasn't working out at the time. But I pull him out, drop the dude, what? And so then he runs off, and he drops his bag. As I pulled him, I guess maybe it was in his lap. No, he didn't think I was some kind of Uber that was gassing up. It was the weirdest thing. So then I chase him a little bit, but I'm 3-piece suited up to go to the audition. So I'm like, okay, stop. I'm just gonna relax. And I was like, I need to call the cops, but I need to go. There's more to the story. But anyway, I went to the audition. I told them about it. I walked in, and the producer said, "I like you. I like your look. You're gonna be a model." And I was like, "Oh, but no, I wanted to be the voice. I wanted to be the announcer." He's like, "No, you're gonna be the model." So again, how can you complain? He's like, "Man, you look good. We want that face. All right, I'll do it." And man, we had so much fun. And unfortunately, that got released right around COVID, and that dumped a lot of our momentum. He shopped it. The producer shopped it, but it just didn't seem like there was just a lot of momentum for him. And I really hate it, because that's why we shot it in Georgia, because he used to come to the Savannah Film Festival down there, and he got kicked out of Hollywood. Someone stole his studio of Netflix or somebody with bigger money. And so he was like, all right, I got to go somewhere. And he was talking to a buddy that he knows from the film festival. He's like, why don't you come and film it out here? Remember all the theaters and stuff you've seen out here? Yeah, come film it on. And so that's what we did. So that was amazing. A lot of fun. All right. So you had those opportunities. I don't even understand how you can meld all that together, and you did it. What were you known as? Were you voted anything in high school?
I did get a superlative. I think it was, what was it? It was weird. It was most likely to do something like most likely to take over the world or something crazy like that. But I think it was done tongue in cheek, because you want to talk about what I was known for. I think mostly it was having a spark of spontaneity, maybe subverting the circumstances, and trying deliberately not to take things too seriously, if that makes sense. Yeah. So I think as somebody that wasn't known for acting out or being, a behavioral issue, I think I was still somebody that liked to challenge things a lot, whether it was social norms or trying to stick up for things that I felt were important, or just trying to imbue banal projects with a spark of originality or zaniness. I think that was kind of one of the things that most people took away from spending 4 years with me. And I only say that because you read the things people write in your yearbook, or you bump into people and they share a story you completely forgot about. And I think while I did have some of these more stereotypical outlets like sports or performance, I think the thing that stuck out to most people was that you never really knew what I was going to do.
So you started shopping colleges. How'd you end up all the way out in Minnesota?
Well, as I mentioned, my father lived in Minnesota, in Duluth. He's still there. And so spending summers out there, I had a chance to visit the campus. I had a chance to attend camps and got on some radars. And also noticed that they had a great broadcast journalism program, which is what I thought I wanted to do. So I was able to parlay all of that into sort of an interest from both sides, and then was able to leverage my test scores into early acceptance. And it just felt like a no-brainer. I was going to be not very far from family. I was going to be at a Big Ten university, and I was going into a program with opportunities that I was really excited about. So there wasn't a lengthy process of me trying to pick a spot. I mean, I was sort of courted by some smaller schools or some places that I didn't have that much interest in. The University of Minnesota was the front runner, and I got early admission, and that was kind of all she wrote.
So you guys are the Golden Gophers?
The Golden Gophers.
How many times did you have to tell anyone, especially this year when they win the national championship, that there's really only one M? Does that turn into a gang warfare of where you've got to tell everybody that you guys are the M? Does that get confrontational?
I personally think you got to earn that. So while I am biased and I love the University of Minnesota, it's my alma mater, I recognize that the University of Michigan and the University of Miami call themselves U of M regionally.
Yep. Yes.
And if you want to take that mantle from them, you got to do something about it. And so far we haven't done that. So power to them. You know, we got the brown jug from Michigan a few years ago. They've been on a roll lately, obviously. And then Miami, they've sort of been in a weird spot, but in the time I was in school, Miami was still a pretty dominant program. So locally, obviously we're the U of M. Everyone says that they mean the University of Minnesota. Nationally, I always kind of took a moment to clarify, because I know that other people have done a lot to deserve that moniker as well.
Yeah. I thought you guys do pretty good. You guys got some wrestlers that have come out of there, right? You guys do pretty good with wrestlers.
Yeah. Actually, you might be familiar with Brock Lesnar.
Oh, yes, I am.
So I did not know who this person was. And I was probably 16 or 17. I was on a visit and I was in the athletic complex. And I walk around a corner and I hadn't finished growing, but I was, 5'10" at this time. And I walk around a corner and I just see like giant pecs right in front of me. And I look up and there's this guy that looks like McBain from The Simpsons. And he's just like, excuse me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what the hell? Like, what is that? So I go back to the lunchroom and I'm telling some of the guys that are at this camp about my experience. And most of them have gone to high school locally. They follow the U of M. They follow all the sports. And so I'm describing this guy and they all look at each other and they're like, Brock Lesnar. And I'm like, who is that? And they look at me like I'm crazy. And in my high school, I think we had a good wrestling team.
Yeah.
Wrestling was not a sport that was supported or surrounded by a lot of enthusiasm the way it is in the Midwest, the way it is in, the Big Ten and the Big 12.
Yes.
It was sort of one of those things where we had some great athletes on our wrestling team. A lot of them were cool guys. They kind of had their own vibe going on. the wrestling room may not have been that sanitary, so you had guys with some skin stuff going on.
Yep.
I looked at the singlet and thought, not for me. And our assistant baseball coach was the varsity wrestling coach, and he used to beg me to come out for wrestling.
Oh.
And I kept telling him no. And I'm sure it would have been a cool experience in some ways. And I think aesthetically, socially, hygienically, I was not willing to go that route. So going to Minnesota and realizing that wrestlers were walking gods was kind of a mind-blowing thing. And then in my dorm, a lot of the athletes are in a dorm. My neighbors are two of the freshman wrestlers my freshman year, and these dudes are wild. Like they are doing things I will not describe on the podcast, but they were out here kicking it, and they were afraid of no one. One of them was this guy named Tommy Owen from Washington State. He was short, and I don't know what weight he wrestled at, but he was out here picking fights with dudes 3 times his size and never losing.
What?
Because, yeah, he was a little machine. You know, these guys are Big Ten wrestlers going to a school that was winning national championships. So that was a big eye opener for me. Between wrestling and hockey at the time, the U of M was very dominant in those two sports.
You guys came to the Frozen Four a lot, right?
Yeah, won it back to back freshman and sophomore year for me. I think beat UNH one year, and the next year, I don't know, it might have been Maine or somebody.
Were you conflicted? Was that hard for you? Because I don't know who you root for at that point.
I mean, I have a lot of love for New Hampshire. It was home at the time, and with that said, I didn't live close to the University of New Hampshire.
Okay.
I knew a lot of people that were there, but I had gone another way, and it was kind of my opportunity to not gloat, but just sort of visibly celebrate a little bit. So yeah, I was happy. You know, you want to be on the winning side of those things, even if you haven't done anything to contribute to the success of the hockey team. I was happy with it. I was fine with it. So
when you got there, you ended up playing a sport.
Yeah, actually 2. So we had a club lacrosse team and obviously a varsity football team. So I ended up walking onto the football team. Which was an experience, but it was a rewarding experience and something I'm glad I did. And I forged some good friendships and had some really memorable experiences. And then the lacrosse team was funny because I switched rooms halfway through freshman year, and I had met this dude at, I think, New Student Orientation from St. Louis, and he was a lacrosse player. He was a defenseman. And he was like, "Wait, you're from New England? You must be a lacrosse player." And I was like, "I know how to play catch. I've worked on shooting a little bit. I've never like played.
Yeah.
And he's like, if you have stick skills, you got to come out for lacrosse." And he was kind of suggesting it as we became friends. He just kind of kept harping on it. I went to a couple of his games, and some of the guys seemed cool. So by the next fall, they were like, "Here's some equipment, like come out." And so that's what I did. And I played 3 seasons on that team and really loved it. Made some great friendships, had some good experiences, and was kind of forced to moonlight a bit because I didn't have the full availability between my major and then the football schedule. I obviously wasn't able to do fall practices. A lot of times with the lacrosse program, there was a real estate issue in terms of practice space. So the practices would be Sunday at 9 p.m. or, that sort of thing, especially in the winter when you're not using outdoor spaces. So those were actually opportunities for me. A lot of those players would hate the later practices, and I'm thinking, oh, I can make it, I'm free. Yeah. So those sort of winter practices, those night practices were real opportunities for me to assert my case for playing time and to start and all that stuff. So it was a weird experience. Schedule wise, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to anyone, but I wasn't thinking rationally about these things. These are 2 things that I really wanted to do, that I was passionate about, and I'm glad I did.
That brings me to a couple questions there. I got to know what you were majoring in to be able to do both of those sports. And then I got to know, every year, since you walked on, I think that was freshman year you walked on, did you have to?
Sophomore year.
Okay, sophomore. So junior and senior year, did you have to keep trying out, or you were assured a spot unless someone came and knocked you down? How'd that work for football?
It was kind of closer to the trying out again. I wasn't at tryouts again, but it was very much you are out there busting your butt trying to make sure that you're adding value, that you are worth a spot, that you are growing and developing. So I was never made to try out again. At the same time, I had an awareness like I'm not somebody people are planning around, you know? So it was one of those things where I saw it as a motivation to push myself. I saw it as a tremendous opportunity. I didn't have NFL aspirations. I've now reevaluated that, looking at like the onslaught of 6-foot white slot receivers that are dominating the NFL. And I'm like, man, I wish someone had invented that like 10 years earlier. Because just looking at my, I struggled to get up to 200 pounds. I struggled to keep weight on. Getting hit by some of those larger guys, it takes a toll on you. I managed to get out with any head injuries, but you get aches and pains and things that I still feel every now and then. And so I didn't really see a path to take football seriously as a career. I loved it, still do, but it wasn't something where I saw people that I thought were like me in the NFL. So with that pressure off, it was really about being the best asset to the team I could be. But yeah, it was a question of sort of, can you stay in discomfort and level up incrementally as time goes on?
So what did you major in?
I started off as a journalism major with an emphasis in broadcast. And after a year, I was pretty convinced that was not what I wanted to do. I took a class called news writing and reporting, and there was a professor that was about to retire actually. And he used to grade my papers in 2 colors of ink. So in blue, he would grade my writing the way he knew I was offering it. And he would have very laudatory things to say. And I would usually get something like a 96 or a 98 or whatever. And he would have comments in blue ink that was this great use of metaphor here, da, 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 da. And then in red, which is the color they grade in, he would slash out a bunch of extraneous words and remind me that we were trying to write for an 8th grade reading level and that this was unnecessary imagery. This was a biased point of view. This was an editorialization of the facts. And so there were a lot of things that he was identifying that signified to him and eventually to me that maybe this wasn't the route I wanted to go down.
Yeah.
And I think he did say something to me at one point. You're a good writer. I think you want to be a writer. I don't think you want to be a journalist. And that stuck with me. So around that time, I was kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do, get my bearings a bit. My mother enters the story again and says, hey, your school has a really great theater department and a really good theater program. You should look at that. And again, having taken it for granted and really enjoyed it and started to miss it, I had said, well, I don't know if people really go to school for that, especially at places that aren't Juilliard, And she says, no, they do. Like, it's totally a thing, idiot. Like, check it out. And so I did, and that ended up being the path I took. I knew some people in the program, and I just felt like I belonged or I was coming home a little bit when I started getting into those classes. And it was a little different because coming up, I didn't have a lot of formal acting instruction per se. I got notes, I got support for the things I was doing well, but I wasn't being taught method or, sort of the more technical facets of acting. I was being directed in productions. So it's kind of the difference between if you are coaching youth football, are you teaching the kids to run your playbook so that you hopefully win a lot of games, or are you focusing on skill development as well? And I feel like early on, and this is not to discredit anybody else, I did have some good mentors as far as just how to use my voice and whatever, but as far as acting, it was really about, this is what we need for this production. This is going to be great. And I did learn from those experiences. I learned a lot, but there were terms being thrown around when I joined the theater department that were new to me. There were sort of people having discussions that I felt unqualified to participate in right away.
Yeah.
But I knew I could act. And there were students, you want to talk about theater nerds, there were some great people, but they were encyclopedias of, they've seen every play and they know every script. And I just wasn't that guy.
Right.
And to this date, I'm still not somebody that's seen every Broadway show. You know, I have my opinions, my favorites. I have a lot of great experiences with that, but I am not a dramaturg to the level that some people are. And so for me, it was really about doing it, becoming better, understanding how to refine an approach or create an approach that was sustainable. And that's where improv sort of popped up again. We started doing it as part of our craft work, and that felt like home to me. And so to this day, it is something, a spark of improv is something I want to bring with me into every audition, every gig, every live performance, because I think it is absolutely vital to keeping things fresh and also to allowing your performance to reflect what makes you, you, versus being tight, being constricted.
Yeah.
What would Robert De Niro do? You know, I think ultimately, if you're being asked to audition or you're being cast, it's because there's something about you that is speaking to whoever's on the other side of that table.
Yeah.
And so for me, trying to respect, honor, and put forth the things that make me, me is really important. And I find improv is a great inroad to doing that.
Man, it's an art that I'm so impressed with. And I like what you said earlier. It's never too late. We'll see. Austin's got a great scene. Our motto is keep Austin weird. And so that's one of the things that we do. We do have some opportunities. So let's say to be determined. We'll see if the opportunity will be followed. All right. So you had an opportunity while you were out there to join a fraternity. Were your mom and dad Greek? How'd you come about making this decision? Because a lot of people, even me, before I joined, I remember thinking, man, I ain't gonna pay nobody to be my brother, to be my friend. I think a lot of people who don't have a Greek background, Greek parents. So how'd that come about for you?
I very much had the attitude you did. I remember actually going away to school. So my parents aren't Greek. I remember going away to school and my mom said something as almost a footnote, like, oh, I better tell him this before he goes off to school. Hey, don't join a fraternity. You don't need to pay for friends. I think literally that was verbatim what she said. And I know what she meant, because when you go to the University of Minnesota, there's what they call fraternity row. And it's along this long one-way street that is 4 lanes wide called University Avenue. And on one side is all of the fraternity houses. On the other side, you see campus buildings. And the campus is massive, but that's sort of the dividing line between residential and we're going to school. Yeah. So when you get to school the weekend before classes, freshmen tend to just sort of march down University Avenue, and all of the fraternity houses are having sort of open door mixers, parties, whatever. And they're looking for people to rush their fraternities. And I had this ringing in my head. I had never been interested in fraternities. I didn't even really understand what they were supposed to be. And the experiences I had that night, I just wasn't impressed. You know, I didn't drink at the time. And I also just didn't kind of get what the point was. I had enough cynicism ingrained in me over understanding that mottos or corporate slogans don't always mean what they are projected to mean. So you see these lofty mottos and these high ideals on the wall, and then you see somebody doing keg stands or, you know, whatever else is going on. And not to cast judgment, but I didn't see myself in that setting.
Yeah.
And so that was something where I was like, well, I need to meet people. Cool. I met people. No, thank you. There were a couple of guys that were kind of nipping at my heels for a while and they gave up. And at the time, Kappa Alpha Psi was not on the yard. Kappa Alpha Psi at the University of Minnesota is represented by the Psi Chapter, and we were dormant from 98 to the fall of 04. So time passes. Somebody that's in my acting program and also wound up being a lacrosse teammate starts talking to me about a fraternity. He said, hey, my dad and my granddad are members of this fraternity, and I think you should actually check it out. Like, it would be cool. And I'm seeing frat row in my head. And I'm like, yeah, man, not for me. Like, I'm kind of surprised at you, honestly. And he's like, it's not like that. It's not like that.
Yeah.
And I now know what he was saying, but for me, it was sort of hitting this thick candy shell I had built up, right? I was like, I don't want to hear it. So time goes by. He mentions it a few more times, sends me the link to the national website. I didn't even look at it, I don't think. And then he goes about becoming a member, we'll say. And I'm seeing this going on, and I'm wondering if he's okay. And there's a long period of time, and our communication had definitely fallen off. And what communication we had was just sort of strange and unusual. And then he has a probate show, and next thing I know, it's the spring, because it's the fall. Next thing I know is the spring, and Kappa Alpha Psi is having Kappa Week for the first time in forever, and people are excited. Yeah. And I had met some of his line brothers who were like the resurrection of the chapter, and they were all cool, and none of them ever tried to recruit me, but I was in their presence a lot. Yeah. And I was invited to volunteer with them for like Buckle Up for KSI. They needed people to help move the car and whatever. I was invited to help with Feed My Starving Children, where you just put those dry goods meals together and ship them out. I was invited to do things that maybe had an impact. I was never recruited. I was never asked to join flat out. Other people took notice of this and started making comments like, yeah, you're going to be one of them. And part of me was like, I don't know if that's really a thing, like, and they're like, yeah, we think we see it. And so much so that some of the other NPHC Greeks on campus started kind of looking at me differently. And I knew some of them or whatever, just personally. Yeah. But they were kind of like, oh, what's going on with you and those guys? Oh, you ever want to talk to us about this? And I was just like, no.
So now they could see you possibly with them.
Yeah. Yeah. But what ended up happening, to put a button on this, is that fall, the Psi chapter gets a house at the end of frat row. Now it's a rooming house. It's not a big castle, but it's a house. And it's got like 13, 14 rooms in it. And they had a room they couldn't fill. And I was suggested as a candidate that would be interested in like low rent and was a good hang and could probably be trusted to like stay out of certain rooms or not touch the X, Y, and Z. And so I was offered an opportunity to live there. And that's when I saw the bond, as we call it at work. The bond, for the listeners, is sort of a term we use to describe the sense of brotherhood and just the altruistic acts that we often commit for the betterment of one another and for the fraternity as a whole, and just sort of the interconnected nature, the familial nature of the organization. So I, sounded like any other slogan to me. And then I start seeing people keep each other in check, wake each other up for class, talk to them about, hey, I know you're getting $20 an hour to sit in a parking garage for a student job, but you need an internship, putting pressure on each other to be better. Oh. And that opened my eyes and made me think, maybe this is legit. Maybe this would do a lot for me. Maybe this would change my life. And so that's when I started looking at it with new eyes. And around that time, a couple of the guys in the chapter were talking to me more like, hey, why don't you read this book by Lawrence C. Ross? Hey, what are you thinking? That sort of thing. Yeah. And so I learned all about the Divine Nine. Wanted to make sure that I wasn't having a proximity bias or a recency bias, or really attracted to the new flashy thing, or because I had a friend in the chapter. And it turned out that of the 5 NPHC organizations, Kappa was the one that spoke to me far and away. And so that's when I decided to really look at it, and the rest is history.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, for those who don't know, my words, man, you have got to be in our glorious fraternity one of the best cane twirlers we got. I'm entitled to my opinion. How much pressure is that? Because I feel like everybody is inboxing you and be like, yo, bruh, can you do a video? Can you come out? Can you show up? I feel like that's a curse.
The only time I've ever felt that way was at Conclave in Orlando in 2017. And the reason being that followed a period of a couple of years where a few of my peers and I, as like cane masters, were putting out videos and really trying to drive home the point that cane work is not dead and that this is a tradition that we are keeping alive and pushing the envelope on. Because there was a period where we weren't seeing it anymore. Instagram was in its infancy and all you're seeing is strolling, and it's the same 5-6 strolls or whatever. And they're great, but as somebody that came from a step background and a cane twirling background within the bounds of the fraternity, myself and some others were a little distraught. We weren't seeing it. So we start putting out this content. And then fast forward to 2017, Paco, who is a famous brother for twirling, was not present. Mike Tuma, who's a peer of mine and an outstanding cane master and now has a cane master class that people can subscribe to digitally, was not present. James Felton Keith, aka Snotty, who to me is like the Michael Jordan of cane twirling. He's the reason I wanted to really develop. He was not present. So all these other guys that were either a generation ahead or my peers that were sort of internet famous from the YouTube era or the Facebook and Instagram era were not there. So I was the one that was around, and I didn't used to wear a lot of paraphernalia, partly because the stuff I got early on was like 2 sizes too big because it was 2006 and baggy was on the way out. But also the cane said it all. And it was also something, it was a practical implement. You know, I could use it to shut down a show or shut up a Sigma or whatever we want to do. Right. And so I was carrying it on me, and everybody wanted to stop me and take a video or whatever. And I try to be very gracious. I think the brotherhood and a brotherly disposition supersedes a lot of the other stuff that is important in the fraternity, but I think that is paramount. And so I tried to never be rude or brush past anybody, but I was getting requests from people 10 years my junior that weren't really requests. They were kind of commands. And so I had to end up having some conversations that I decided to make uncomfortable because there's a line. And so that was the only time it ever became frustrating or a curse. Most of the time I'm very happy to, you know, I have a brother from my chapter who made this hat. It's the social club with a K. He asked me to do a web ad for his stuff, and I was happy to do it. Because one, I love doing the things I do. And two, I love supporting my brothers that are putting themselves out there and have a new idea and are offering something, especially if it's something that the rest of us can enjoy. Right. So I really do love performing. I love teaching. That's the only instance where it was ever kind of a pain, just because I couldn't get 10 feet.
I can imagine.
But this is not woe is me or whatnot. It was a learning experience. It was a learning experience where we're in a new generation now, where people want their own bespoke content from creators, and you are setting yourself up to be invited, asked, or told that you're going to do this if you carry a cane with you in a target-rich environment, as it were. So, yeah.
Wow. So then it goes down exactly as I thought it would go down. I feel really bad because I feel like that's the first place everyone goes. They might not even know your name, but they've seen a video and they're like, "Hey, it's that guy."
Well, there was a period too where you remember Sam White, from Delta Eta. So Sam became a phenomenon, a cultural phenomenon in 2014, 13, 14. There were some videos of him strolling with his brothers that went viral. The first one that really broke the internet actually took place in the gym at Northeastern. If you look carefully, you can see the emblem on the wall. And it was kind of a grainy cell phone video. So people thought it was me. And I'm getting all these inboxes like, "Yo, Noop, you're on TMZ, da-da-da-da." And I'm like, it's really not me. And so there was a long period where I doubt he ever got mistaken for me, because we are a full generation apart. I definitely got mistaken for him a few times and have met him on a few occasions. Wonderful brother. I think he handled that whole thing very well. But it was one of those things too, where, yeah, it's like your name becomes a little irrelevant. It's like, oh, are you the cane one or the shimmy one? Or it's like, yeah. But it's been, I try to enjoy those moments and find the humor or the sort of whimsy in them, because ultimately I try not to wear pride or ego on my sleeve, especially around brothers. Like, I assume we are in a family environment. So even if somebody speaks to me in a way that I find surprising or disarming, take a second, because I assume good intent, and 99.9% of the time that is the case.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that. So where would you say you are in your life goals? What do you still have yet to achieve in life? What are you pushing for?
A lot of things. For me, the goal is not necessarily one mountaintop, but it's sort of a state of being. And I've flirted with it. But for example, I mentioned earlier, being an actor that is seldom asked to audition, but is asked to take roles.
Yes.
That is where I want to be. And I have been in stretches like that, mostly with stage roles, sometimes with on-camera things, where somebody says, hey, we don't know each other, but I saw you in this. I'd really like you to come in and play this character. Hey, are you available for this? And it got to a point where I wasn't really auditioning for much when it came to theater, because I was booking out my schedule. And that's a wonderful feeling. I think being in a more perpetual state of that, where maybe I'm auditioning for things, but I'm always in demand, is where I want to be. Because I think if you give yourself one mountaintop, there are, you want to climb Everest, right? But you have to have something besides that, because you're going to do it, and then you have to live the rest of your life. Winning a Super Bowl. These guys, I'm sure they're very glad they've done it. I would love to have won a Super Bowl, but at the same time, it's like life goes on. What's your next mountaintop? So for me, it's getting to a place of sustained demand and opportunity to create and to find new challenges and work with new people and work with old friends as well. So that's really the goal. And as somebody that relocated about a year ago, I am in the introductory phase of letting people know who I am and what I can do. So making new connections, getting my tapes out there, showing up in rooms, and it has begun to bear fruit. But I am at the same stage I was a few years ago, but in a new place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it is. Are you of the mindset right now where where you might want to retire at? Here in America, abroad, Utah?
That is a great question. Not Utah. I don't think Utah. I think, one of the places that I've discussed a fair amount is Trinidad. My wife's family's from there. Okay. And so it's a place I've had the opportunity to visit several times. I was just there. It feels not like home, like I belong to it, but it feels familiar, welcoming, and a place I love to be. So that would be a possibility. It's a very different way of life. I watched an episode of your podcast with our brother Peter Conroy, and he was mentioning something about the Caribbean as well, and how it is definitely a gear change or gear shift from maybe the way we live here. Yeah. But that's something that at a certain time in my life, I would not be opposed to. And then, I really like Boston. I think Chicago is a really cool place. Do I want to be there all winter? Probably not. But no. I think having the flexibility and the mobility to maybe move between one or two places is also a very attractive thought about how you spend the last few acts of your life. So since you have connections to Trinidad, how come Tobago don't ever get no love? That's a great question. I don't understand it, because, I would feel slighted if I was. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, my experience, I've been to Tobago twice. I've been to Trinidad 7 times. Okay. And it's always that I've gone to Tobago from Trinidad and returned to Trinidad. It's a sojourn within a trip. Okay. And my impressions of it, which I haven't done the circumference of Tobago nor Trinidad. I've spent my time mostly in the capital city of Trinidad, some secondary or tertiary suburb areas. And then in Tobago, I've gone really to the same spot twice, but driven through a lot of it. And it is different. I think the attitude people have toward each other is sort of, oh yeah, you're a little different over there, but like, it's all love. So I think hearing Peter talk about the Twin Cities where I went to school, hearing about Minneapolis and St. Paul, I think there's a little, not enmity, but there's a little more of a rivalry there. I don't know that Trinidad and Tobago, from my limited experience, have that sort of relationship. I'm really not the best authority to talk about it, but at the same time, my impression is that because it is the same nation, the Trinidad and Tobago are one nation,
Yes.
that it is sort of folded in culturally for outsiders, that they don't really know what would define it separately, even though I'm sure people from Tobago could tell you.
I'm curious. I have never been. I got to go spend some more time in Jamaica, where my family lineage emanates from. But I'll get over there. Matter of fact, I got a couple from Trinidad and Tobago that's going to come on the pie, and they can't wait to talk. So they are of Indian descent, and people always want to ask them, "Hey, so where are you guys from?" And everyone's always waiting to hear like Bangladesh or India, and they're like, Trinidad and Tobago. No, but where are you from? Trinidad and Tobago. Like, so which just tells you a lot of people, one, have not met people from there and understand the diversity. But since you've been there more than me, I've been 0 times. I just had to hear from you on that.
Yeah, that's the cool thing about Trinidad, from my view, is that Trinis don't look like one thing, or it's not, there are so many different groups, ethnic groups, people with different roots that make up the culture there. And so you have Trinis of Indian descent, you have Trinis of Chinese or other Asian descent, you have white Trinis, you have black Trinis. And I don't know that it's a total utopia, but the cultures in terms of the food and what you see at Carnival and all that other stuff do seem to sort of blend in a way that I don't think people expect. And often, until I open my mouth, or if I'm wearing like a Red Sox hat or something, it's kind of a giveaway. But if I'm just standing there until I open my mouth, people don't necessarily assume I'm not from there. They look at me as somebody that could just as easily be from there as the person standing next to me, which is kind of cool and in my experience, kind of unique.
Heck yeah, it is. That's what I like. And I heard from them. I interviewed them on live radio. That's how I met them. Amazing.
Oh, nice.
I can't wait. And I think they'll hear this episode. So we're going to get them on. We're going to go on, everybody. You're going to love this couple. So how can people find some of your work? And are there any upcoming projects? I don't want to date us with this epi, because I think that this is going to be a long-lasting and very popular episode. But if there's something that's coming up next week, heck yeah, we want to know. I don't know. I couldn't get to it, but I don't want to stop others. What could you tell us? How could we find you? You've been doing some acting. Like, is there some roles, some videos, some red box stuff we got to go get? Like, how can we get more?
Well, the next thing coming out, I believe, I did an episode of My True Crime Story, which airs on VH1, and that season just started airing last Tuesday. So I think they have 2 episodes out so far this season. I don't know what order they are coming out in, but I've got an episode of that this spring. So keep your eye on that, and look out for a Russian drug dealer named Ivan.
Malik Yetz? And
then other than that, I had a week on a film last summer, right before the SAG-AFTRA strike, called Barron's Cove. I don't know that there's a release date out for that yet, but that will come out, I believe, later this year. And then right now, if people want to spot me, they can check out, it's not really the season for it, but there's a film called Spirited on Apple TV Plus, which is a Christmas movie, but you will see my face front and center in that for for moments. I'm not the star, but you'll recognize the stars.
Oh, no, that's okay. It happened. You're in it. Good enough for me. And I
It was a
won't
great
take
experience.
anybody
It
else.
was a great experience.
Yeah, I mean, that's legit. That's awesome. I always ask this. You've watched a couple episodes, so you know it's coming. I do like to see people squirm, but I'm going to do it a different way. And I appreciate that you've looked at a couple other episodes. I know that you know, I'm going to ask you, who's the most interesting person that you know, and what will you do to help me get them on the pod? But I'm going to do a switch. I'm going to do a switch here. I want to know someone that you share an obscure interest with. Obscure. So now this can't be a fraternity, brother. Obscure. So I will let you know, improv, theater, I'm going that route. And then any other interest that you have that I don't even know about. Like you might be into cosplay. So I want you to go outside. So I'm going to take Kappa off the table.
Okay.
And I'm going to take Minnesota football off the table if there was a team meet. I'm taking those two big things off the table.
Okay. I think there are a couple of people that come to mind. One is my guy, Derek Snow.
Uh-huh.
He is a Cincinnati-based actor, playwright, and director. He has an incredibly deep knowledge and interest in, I guess you would call it like fantasy canon and sci-fi canon and comic book canon. So he's very deep and well-versed there. He is also a prolific writer. He's written some things that are now being produced around the country. And he's a big Cincinnati sports fan. So, and that has sort of been always my stepson team is the Bengals and the Reds, purely because of players when I was growing up. Yeah. I had an experience watching the Bengals in their second Super Bowl when I was young. That was very formative.
Was that
and then the Reds? Yeah, Icky Woods was on that team. So the Icky Shuffle was like the first dance I ever learned how to do. So I've always had love for the Bengals. So if the Pats can't win it every year, then I want the Bengals to do it. But then and then the Reds had a guy named Barry Larkin, who's now in the Baseball Hall of Fame.
I'm familiar.
He was like, to me, he was the mountaintop of shortstops. I think he had everything. I think he's still underappreciated, but I digress. Anyway, Derek Snow is a thoughtful, intelligent, funny, and very, very multi-hyphenate guy that I think, what are we at? We're at almost 90 minutes. I think you could go 2 hours with him and not blink.
Don't threaten me with a good time. All right. I have your contact info, so I'll be holding you to that for you to put in.
I'd be happy to connect you. He's meant a lot to me in my artistic life and just as a friend. And I think you guys would totally hit it off.
I am glad that you moved some things around. That might have been painful for you. So I want to say thank you for that. Because I knew an hour would be a travesty. There's more. Ladies and gentlemen, listeners all over the world, we are not done with Phineas Clark. This was awesome, man. And we could have gone deeper on a whole bunch of other little topics, but that's okay. That's all right. I say this all the time. I like to leave a little meat on the bone. I want the listeners to understand you said some things and they're thinking and they're like, Donato, why didn't you go into, hey, people, this is how we got to leave him with some high energy and an interest to come back. If he shoots out all of his ammo, he's like, nah, I think I'm good, bro. I mean, you got it. But
yeah, well, I will say I aspire to be somebody that never runs out. I see you that same way, where I feel like you have just a source of energy, curiosity, and creative potential. So I appreciate you for not only inviting me on, but just for doing what you're doing. I think it takes a lot of work and intention and courage to make something and put it out there. I know that firsthand, but what you're doing is really dope. and I will continue to be a supporter, bruh. And I'll see you again on the pod whenever you need me.
I appreciate it. And Phineas, you're my guy. You're a great follow on social media. Any parting social media attention that you would like to have from us? If you'd like to drop a couple.
Honestly, the big one I'm on for cool, interesting stuff is Instagram. I'm a visual person, so that's the medium that attracts me. And you can find me at Phineas Clark. It's just my name as it appears on the pod, just at Phineas Clark. And yeah, I usually post not every job I do, but stuff I'm really proud of, or if I have a cool experience working on something. You will get the occasional flag football highlight or something more personal like that. But that's where you can find me.
I've got a thought. I've been waiting all epi to drop this on you. What if, because I can do multiple people here, what if we did an improv event, like a live streamed improv event?
I'm for it. I think that's a great idea. I mean, during the pandemic, there were so many things that people figured out how to do. Like I was part of choose your own adventure plays that were hosted on Zoom and just wild stuff. I did live theater on a stage with 6-foot squares. So we knew not to get too close to one another, but they were filmed and streamed. And then I was in a fake TV set. So it's like you're on film, TV, and stage at the same time. So anything is possible. So if that's something you want to do, I will help you build it. I will support it. If you want me in it, if you want me off to the side helping out, we got it. So
no, you ain't working. I want you in it. I would like, in my mind, the way I envisioned it, and we can tinker, we can clean this up. But I thought, again, I'm going to bring up, I got some words here. All right, team, there's the four of you guys. Let's go with it. And then you guys just work. And I think that would be so much fun to watch, especially for those of us who don't necessarily follow improv. But if I have a following and the participants, if we could publish this and we could get some eyes on, I think it would be so much fun. And it would be all live. We could live stream it to all the platforms. I think it'd be fun, man. So
that would be dope. I have some more specific thoughts and ideas for you that I'll share offline, but I'm into it.
He didn't give me a no. That's all I need. Thanks again, Phineas. This was a blast, man.
It was a blast, Snoop. Thank you again and have a great night.
Yo, good night.
All right, yo.